I think
Is that why I'm here?
this is either episode 3 or episode 4. I'm not sure which order it'll come. I would feel weird putting 2 HDR people. Matt's episode 2, and I don't want to do 2 HDR
No.
ones.
You don't want to saturate the market.
So I don't want to saturate the market with too much HDR. But you'll probably be right after the next one. So you'll probably be 4.
Oh.
But just so people know, this is before 4. This will almost
Back
seem
to the Future?
This will almost seem like a prequel
Okay.
to the next one we do.
Wrap your mind around that.
And of course, it is right after Game of Thrones, so I have my Winter is Coming shirt. I pick a
It's
different.
beautiful outside.
I
by
know
the way.
we need to get through this podcast so we can
I know.
go grab a drink somewhere because
Cocktails on the patio.
it's 75 today after a mountain of snow. I mean, your move was delayed to Minnesota.
Yeah. Now
Because-
I'm Minnesotan again. Yes, I'm Minnesotan. And I get there and do you know how miserable people are about the weather sometimes up there? Like I get there and I'm like, hey, I'm back. And they're like, yes, weather, man.
I just think about my time in Los Angeles when there would just be a drop of rain and everyone would just get depressed.
Oh.
It was like immediate, like, everyone's used to the sunshine and the beautiful 70 to 80 degree weather, so consistent. When there was one drop of rain, people started driving like idiots.
But that makes sense, though. Like, they're used to that 70.
They're used to their status quo.
Degree, beautiful every day. Minnesota's kind of a wild card. It doesn't matter what season. Like, it could be 85, it could be 20 below, and that could be in the middle of July. So when you go there, I expected them to be like, yeah, we're okay. It's cool. This is just normal. Right?
Yeah.
Is this normal? It's only been 3 years since I lived there. I kind of forget.
Yeah. So we're joined by Rachel Riopel,
Oh, yeah, that's me.
digital design principal.
Yes, we'll go with that.
We'll go with that.
Digital design principal.
At HDR,
Yep.
we've had Matt on, who is kind of more focused on the computational design side of digital design at HDR. And now we have you, who brings a lot of experience in BIM and project management, knowledge on contracts, and all sorts of like
fun
a different
stuff.
It's very different. It's a very different side of design technology than we typically talk about because BIM's been a part of the conversation for a really long time. And everyone's really excited about computation. Whenever we talk about design technology today, and I think historically people talk about the tools, but the stuff that you've been talking about and have been working on is very kind of management related. It's very like change management and cultural and
Kind of the packaging around all of the cool tools and technologies. I mean, it's setting up the environment and the ecosystem in which it can run and operate efficiently.
it's the implementation.
Implementation.
And if you think about like the cost of software versus the cost of implementation, it's like
A pittance.
Yeah,
Yeah.
the cost of technology is nothing compared to the investment that a firm needs to make in just getting set up.
And maintained and sustained and all those things.
What do you think the most expensive part of a digital design technology effort is? Like if you just had to go off the top of your head, like
Communications.
communications, like just talking to people.
Talking about
Talking
it.
to people.
Talking to people. The thing is about technology is most people don't know what they don't know.
Yeah.
And how do you change that? You have to go out and talk, and you have to tell them, hey, there's this thing you could do that's going to help you. How do you gain productivity? Well, you don't just keep doing the same thing faster and faster and faster. Well, yes, you get modicum, improvements, but you need to evolve the process. And if you want to do that, you need to learn, acquire new behaviors, and change. So
At all levels, like you're not talking about just the design staff that needs to do production.
And clicks. I mean, picks and clicks seem like the obvious answer. Well, if we teach them how to do something faster or better, we'll just be fine.
Yeah.
But you need leadership buy-in to allow the culture to evolve and absorb those things. And then you need there's several layers of leadership that need buy-in and for different reasons. You know, the top is just sign the check,
Right.
sign the check.
And they need to know
create
why
the wave.
they need to know why they're signing that check, because they're probably expecting some kind of return on it, right? They're expecting that, hey, I'm signing I'm making a decision, I'm putting some money down, and they kind of need to know, okay, I'm going to get some kind of return on it. They may not 100% know what it is, but they have to have some
It
inclination.
depends on the person that's asking that question, what you need to put in that answer.
Yeah.
Some people are very faith-based.
Yeah.
I feel it, we're going to do better. I like to, and there's people that are purely numbers based. And I feel like the reality is that you're going to land somewhere in the middle. You shouldn't go based on just my gut feels great. Or you shouldn't go based purely on numbers, because you'll spend all day getting to numbers, and they'll be very loosely based on what's actually going to happen. It's not, again, we're not fine tuning the same thing happening for 20 years. It's a new process every 6 months in some cases. And so it's kind of a moving target you're trying to chase. So trying to put those arguments together at the level of leadership buy-in is interesting. Again, it's very based on the person asking the question.
Right.
But then you've got leadership of the actual project work.
Yeah.
And that's the project management level. I mean, they get everything piled on their plate. You are responsible for this, and this, and yeah, the list is huge, and they can delegate, but they also have to lead. And project managers, man.
They have the most. I mean, if you look at it on paper, in terms of how they're being measured, performance-wise, they have the most to lose. I mean, they have to keep their projects on budget. They have to make sure that their staff is being utilized. They have, and once you try to throw something new on top of that, be like, look, you're gonna, think back to when Revit was first being adopted by HDR. They're like, well, they probably looked at their team when it came to CAD. They're like, I can predict how long it's going to take this team to produce this set of documents with AutoCAD, and now you're throwing a big unknown, and
they stick with the devil you know versus the devil you don't, because they're complaining all the while, we're not productive, we need to be better, but they're not going to adopt something. At this point was kind of, we're not adopting a new thing because we have no way to measure it, Yeah. Now fast forward, say 10 years later, in our kind of implementation full on, we're starting to get more things you can measure. And if people are paying attention, you can do a little bit better, better job of that. So it's not so unknown. But the success or failure in most cases does rest with that kind of layer of project management. I think the leaders of a company really, some of them are saying, hey, I believe in this. I've heard of the good stories and the tales of success. We should go there. But because of all the things that you mentioned, that the responsibilities of the project manager, they kind of don't want to touch that.
Yeah.
They don't want to push them too far. They don't want to say, you're going to try this new software. But I think the successful implementations or steps forward are found when the upper echelons of leadership kind of let the reins go a little bit and say, the project managers, you're going to do this, but we're going to let you do it. We understand that there might be some deviation from your norm.
Right.
There's got to be that allowance or something communicated where it's okay, the permission has been given to.
We know that the first project isn't going to be as performative as your other projects, but we're placing a bet.
Maybe not, right?
And maybe not. We know that they're kind of they're allowing for that type of potential to occur, because it's a bet on, okay, once you get through that process, and you start to learn a new approach, the next project after that is going to be above and beyond where the past projects have been, because now you've figured out the new system and you're going to go forward. That's the bet.
Well, even I take it back. The most successful, I think, ends up being the project managers that kind of they know it, they want it, they say it's going to happen. My team's behind me. We're going to do this.
Yeah.
They just do it. They don't necessarily need you're okay, go ahead and do it. They kind of take it and they do it. But I think the larger picture, we do need to have some allowance for people to feel like it's okay to fail. Yeah. And fail doesn't mean, lose millions and millions of dollars, but just do differently than you did before.
Well, that's what's kind of interesting when you think about bigger firms like HDR, going down the road of innovation initiatives. And there's always, I think, a hesitancy there because there are millions of dollars on the line when you're in a big firm,
Big
and
projects,
big projects, and potentially bigger risk that goes along with it. And getting a big firm to, take that calculated risk when that's on the line is an interesting one, because then you can contrast that to a small firm or like a startup, where the Silicon Valley motto is fail fast. And you try to fail as much as possible so you can actually get to something that works and you understand what doesn't work really well. But you have to really ride that line very differently in a big practice.
Innovation, right?
Right.
Like innovation, struggling to find innovation in a very structured, very necessarily. I mean, it's important for it to be structured so we can kind of operate on a wide scale, broad scale. But innovation, I see innovation a couple different ways. I guess let's step back for a second, and I'm doing the same thing.
That's all right.
Step back for a second, and my view of just digital design in our practice is really to look at four different areas. And I think you know my 4 areas, right? Like the applied R&D, which is more like what Matt really focuses on.
Right.
Computation lives there.
He's bringing the new stuff into an applied practice.
It's cool stuff.
Right.
Applied research and development. When you say research and development, people get, oh, you're just wasting money. Unless you're at a university and they're like, yes, research and development.
Yeah.
But in a firm like this, you say research and development, you have to very, very clearly qualify. We're still making money. We're still doing this to make some money. But the applied R&D, and then there's the opposite kind of side of that coin, which is policy or standards or things that have been very well vetted and said, hey, you know what, we buy into this and we're going to do this across the board. And that becomes the more standardized components of digital design. And then we look at the other 2 areas, which are communication and what was the last one? Services. This is actual projects that are out there normally functioning. So applied R&D kind of ropes in pursuits kind of more often than policies based on project, and pursuits are applied R&D. Those are 4 areas, and leaving research and development, innovation to come from a couple of different areas, not just I have an idea, let's try it, but projects find themselves in predicaments often. Not because anybody's good or bad. It's just that every situation's unique. And so they've got to come up with a way to resolve something in front of them. And you'll find really cool stuff comes out of that. Some of it's cool enough that you want to study it further.
Right.
And of those that you want to study further, some have potential to be sustainable and some just don't. And some had a very specific purpose and great and wonderful for that project, but that's where it lives. Computation has kind of wandered all across the map in terms of what it's doing for our projects. And I'm sure Matt talks about that, but seeing that evolve has been really cool. Taking those innovations and making them standards and policies is the super fun stuff. Yeah.
Well, it's like, I've thought about this, like what happens when, will we see computational design standards? I mean, there's things that are akin to it, like coding standards and the way you might organize an algorithm, which are very, I think, are similar, but they're a bit different than, say, a modeling standard or a standard that's used to like help deliver documents. And I've often wondered, like, at what point is computational design skills and that mode of working reach a point where actually we now need to really think about delivery standards with this, because there's going to need to be a bar set somewhere from a quality standpoint, especially if you're going to be using an algorithm to deliver a building, right?
Standardization for computation.
Yeah.
It probably made Matt squeamish.
Yeah, well, we didn't really talk about it very much. I think we avoided the standards talk with Matt.
Yeah.
I didn't want to torture him.
Well, but that's kind of the things that obviously in the conversation with me we're having, because that's the stuff I kind of think about when applying or pursuing new technologies and employing them. Is how can we deliver these, and how can we say what we're delivering, and how can we rely upon what we commit to? That's the question. evolving deliverables, and BIM has been really cool. It affords a lot of benefits, but it's been hard to kind of define consistently. And for some people, when you're not trying to figure out the logistics of the legal matters, or the insurance, or of all of the real paperwork kind of stuff, it's really cool. It's fun. Go do whatever you want. But when you have to be accountable for things, you kind of got to be very careful what you're putting out there. So let's sign and seal a model.
Yeah.
But
there's all sorts of liability that gets wrapped around these assets, and we have a hard enough time, as you've just alluded to, getting our head around what it means to like deliver a model and not a set of drawings. Now, if you then try to step ahead and try to imagine, well, we're not going to deliver a model, we're going to deliver an algorithm, or we're going to deliver a program. Can you imagine? Like, and this is like, I think when it comes to like the philosophy of this podcast, it's really about kind of grounding us a little bit. These are hard questions. These are hard. These are very hard questions for the industry, especially an industry that and the audience that watches the show, it typically gets caught up in a lot of the hype of these new tools, and we want to see them be used productively in practice. And I think it's a very exciting time. There's new stuff coming out, like you said, like there's like this 6-month changeover. There's new stuff happening every week, like new innovations, and thinking about how it then manifests itself as like a cornerstone of practice becomes a very different problem. So I actually wanted to step back a minute. How did you get into architecture?
Into architecture? Oh, well, way back.
Way back. What made you want to be an architect?
So kindergarten. No. I think architecture for me was, I just loved art. It sounds like such a generic answer. I loved art. I loved problem solving. I liked figuring things out, and then I liked bringing things to reality, or seeing something through to create an intended effect. Right. My initial draw into architecture was a little bit more psychology than it was necessarily, material or anything like that. It was more about the creating spaces for education. I thought I'm very fascinated by how people learn and how environments impact people's ability to do these things. So I actually started looking in high school. I started looking at different ways to go and like explore with local architecture firms in Minneapolis, and understand how designers worked. And mostly I ended up bleeding over a bunch of models. I was like, here, go play with the foam core models. And I was like, it's not really okay. So funny. But I went into architecture school regardless. And I did a thesis on a high school design. And I ended
in high school.
No, I went to college.
You went to college. So this isn't like because I had in high school, it was like you
had a thesis in high school?
Well, no, it was a thesis. It was like a senior project. You had to like come up with a project in high school.
No.
And mine was architectural, because I took a CAD class. That was my point of entry. It was very much like, I guess I was kind of like you. I liked art. And then, but I didn't like art classes much. But I really liked some of the engineering courses.
Okay.
And so architecture happened to be this interesting blend. And, I took an AutoCAD class. I didn't like that as much as hand drafting. I really enjoyed the hand drafting process when I was in high school, and that's kind of what got me into applying for architecture school.
I got really frustrated by it. So our drafting class, I loved our teacher, but it was hand drafting, and it was like you break out all the stencils and you're like the toilet. The stenciling part. I forgot about that. I just have this romantic idea or memory of just the T-square and triangle. And drawing lines, but I guess, templates.
And then you get the template, and it's be like 1/4-inch scale.
And here, fast forward, 20 years, I'm still dealing with templates and content related things. But anyway, so the drafting was more frustrating than it was enjoyable to me in high school. But again, I still persisted. I liked the idea of it. And I didn't have AutoCAD classes in high school. We weren't that fancy. So I went to college. I went to 5-year professional degree. I wanted to be very practical in my education, and I thoroughly enjoyed the education I did get. I went to NDSU and Fargo, and I got a lot of different exposure to different professors and whatnot. But I still held on to the education all the way through, that focus on education. We did all sorts of different project types, and I was the kid in class. I loved our drawing semester or year of drawing. Basically, did hand drafting and all sorts of things. And I was not the one that was, sitting at a computer doing the computer-based stuff. I had some really good friends that were using Form Z, and they were going crazy. And then I had another friend of mine who refused to touch a computer the entire time he was in school, and I was like, well, that's
we all had that friend.
I'm not that crazy. He did some beautiful work, by the way. But
I know those tend to, I was, there would be semesters where I wouldn't touch a computer at all either. I'd get burned out on them in one semester, and then I wouldn't touch them on my next project. But I knew people that, that was their jam, and they would do.
It was very intentional.
It was very intentional, and it would be like you'd look at their design work, and I would just be envious of them. And I don't know if it had much to do with technology per se, but it was certainly an interesting kind of, they had the sort of more of the hipster type of vibe to them. Yeah, they're a little bit more edgy in their approach.
A little rebellious.
Yeah.
But I so just to underscore, I was not like the technophile, of the class, and I was very much into sustainability and like those kinds of things. And so I graduate. I mean, I made friends with people that did technology and like were really good at it, because I found them fascinating. And also I was like, well, it's really helpful. Sit in the plotter room at like 3 a.m. I'm like, oh my gosh, I screwed something up. How do I fix it? And I learned a lot through them. But I got out of school, and I don't know about anybody else who's been an architect or is an architect and remembers that first year out of school. If it was just me. But man, was I depressed.
Yeah.
I had access to things like Form Z. I did not use them very much, but Form Z or the latest version of Autodesk products or whatever they're feeding the kids at school, I had it. And then you go to real practice at that point.
Yeah.
And we're still in like our R14 or whatever we were. It was kind of astounding. And I was like, what did I do?
Yeah.
What did I do? So the technology wasn't where I was. So I was like, can I please sketch up? Can I sketch up?
Yeah.
And so I was like component building, and I was the crazy intern in the quarter, like, doing things for renderings, and, all interns stay late and work lots of hours, but that's what I spent my time doing. And for the first year or so, and then I got really into AIA, and I found kind of a lead accreditation as a thing. So all those things kind of started my career, and I kind of realized I liked the training, I liked the education, I liked learning and evolving the profession. And I saw when I graduated, we had heard about this thing called Revit. It was like,
right.
And I remember specifically a conversation with one of my classmates. He's like, it's gonna model the bolts and the connections and everything. And I was like
the 3D again.
No way.
And if you think about like the hype cycle, it was probably at peak hype by that point, right?
It
was like, oh yeah, it's going to do all these things. It's going to be like a product modeling feature-based parametric modeler for architecture, like manufacturing has.
And I was like, oh, what's this? I should probably know. And so I kind of paid attention. But over the first couple of years of being out in the world, I was fortunate enough to be introduced to a friend of mine, a game friend of mine, who was just a master at Revit, at Revit and BIM, and it was much more. I had a data mind, and so. I was just really fast. I was talking to him, and I was like, "How does this? And how do you do this? And how do you do that?" And I'm learning all the while, keeping myself entertained while I'm drafting in R14 or whatever. So we had a couple of projects that were venturing off into Revit, and I was like, wow, I want to see what this is. And it was very, at that time, I think it wasn't atypical of any of the firms, but adoption of Revit was like, maybe, that we're maybe going to do this. We can have a little cell over here doing some of this. And,
those firms still exist.
Oh, yeah. You see that? You see them?
They're still out there.
It was very, very much, that was the cutting edge, was like dabbling your, pinky toe into it. And it wasn't going fast enough for me. I said, this is blocks to this. I can't.
Yeah.
I cannot sit here and wait until the greater collective decides that we're going to use this on all of our projects. I want to know how it works.
Right.
I went out and I actually bought my own copy of the software, and nerd that I am, had nothing to do on the weekends or evenings. So I went and I sat in my apartment and like did nothing but learn the ins and outs of this tool to understand it. And through that, I got very familiar with understanding more about data and how data, works in relationship from one to the other. And I was hooked.
Yeah.
That was it. So
and you were doing this simultaneously, because I know you're a licensed architect.
Yes.
So
yes.
you went through you were kind of paralleling this interest in BIM, and did you finish your license before getting into technology? Did you get it out of the way first, or was it very much parallel, or was it after?
Parallel. I had like 3 jobs in studio, and I was an athlete in college at the same time. So I'm all about doing it all at once. Like
You're one of those overachievers. You see, I couldn't do that. So I was. I remember distinctly the moment I decided I wasn't going to be an architect.
Oh.
So it was on the weekend, and I was actually working on a project. And I
did you finish that project?
Oh yeah, totally. Yeah, no. It was I was working on some code. I was learning software. I was learning how to do parametric modeling. I was working on a project, but I was also getting like a blog post ready. And when I was in the midst of doing this, I got the email from NCARB that my renewal was done to kind of maintain my IDP. And I kind of looked at that, and I looked at my screen of code and Grasshopper definitions, and I was just like, trash bin.
Oh.
And that was like the moment you said, I'm going to follow this path as far as I can go. So I didn't quite have that. I didn't quite have the wherewithal to balance athletics, which I'm not athletic.
That's okay.
And licensing and technology. So you were able to do all of them.
In a manner of speaking, sure. So, I said lead. I wanted accreditation. I did that. I was hell bent on my license. I was getting it come hell or high water. I did not know necessarily if it was going to be, I'm keeping my license forever, but I'm like, I set out to do this. I'm going to do it.
Yeah.
And I did in 2009. I've been registered since 2009. But it was right at that same time that I was exploring the technologies to make practice better. I think my frustration was the technology wasn't there in practice. Even if I had access to all the tools that were in my, in my hands at college, would that have made me any better? No, not really,
Right.
because that's not, it wasn't real. It was playing with the tools to come up with something that would end up in a crit, and you could talk about it and get yelled at once in a while for it. But, it's okay. It's all part of the process. But when you go to practice, it's got to have an end deliverable. It's got to have an end goal. You're getting paid for this. You're doing something for a client. And then I realized there's got to be something around that. And so I guess from day one, my focus on technology has been, yes, you have to understand the tool and technology, how it functions,
Right.
the picks and clicks, but there needs to be an environment in which it can flourish or can succeed. So I went to, of course, Autodesk University. What was that, 2008, 2007, 2008, something like that. I'd been... No, I think that was probably my first, 2007, probably. Whatever it was just shortly after I had moved from Florida to Vegas or something. But I went there and all brand new in the profession. I was like, I have opinions and
Yeah.
I have thoughts. And I'm hearing people speak and talk about these things. And I was like, well, some of you go, yeah, I totally agree with that. It's the same as now, right? You go and you go, no, I definitely don't agree with that. And I managed to have a conversation or two with some folks and friends of mine who knew other people, just networking. And I sat down and talked with one of them in particular. And I just remember we had a very strong disagreement over something.
Yeah.
It was kind of the whole statement of the jump from CAD to Revit is like a step, something about putting a man on the moon or something like that. There was some weird parallel they were trying to draw. It's like, well, yeah, no, it is pretty significant, the difference between drawing 2D lines, whether, in AutoCAD or on drafting table, to looking at relational data in a 3D space with, all that entails. It's a huge shift.
Yep.
It's not just as simply, let's change out the tools and carry on.
Right.
And so I was pretty serious about this. I'm like, this is huge. You can't just, say it's no big deal. And I think I left feeling like, well, I probably pissed that person off.
Yeah.
It wasn't much longer than that. About a month later, after I had gone home and gotten over it and got back to work and was still doing my thing and learning my craft on the side as well as doing my work and I got a phone call, and I was like, well, who is this?
Yeah.
And they're like, well, so we've got this opportunity. I was like, what do you mean opportunity? I'm like, I was not pursuing another job or anything like that, but it came up and they said, you want to come on over and do this thing, which was implement Revit throughout HDR. And I was like,
And what year was this again? This was
2008.
2008.
Yeah, it was 2008.
Which is, this came up with Matt. We had a big market crash.
It was right. Yeah, so it was right around the time. So all those things factored in too. I was going, well, people are getting laid off. I don't know how this is. I had no necessarily certainty that what I was doing was going to carry on. And I was like, you know what? I really think that I can bet on this. I think.
Yeah.
I can bet on this. I think it'll take me in a good direction, a little more security, and also is very interesting to me.
Well, I think with the security side of it, and the bet, I think, is right, because in that period, during the recession and then the recovery, firms needed to figure out how to get better. In many ways, I would say, the last couple of years, the economy's been great. We're kind of always the victims of our own success, though, right? Because when things are going along, things are moving along just fine, you're less inclined to try to change the formula.
When it's the most optimum time to do so, right?
Exactly, and when you have the resources to do so. But there was quite a bit of retooling in 2008. And then you had at that time also then the emergence of groups like CASE, who started up in the midst. Yeah, who's that? In the midst of the recession, and when you look at it, to borrow a line from Ghostbusters, these folks are either certified geniuses or authentic wackos. It turned out the CASE experiment kind of worked, and it's interesting to kind of talk to people who found their foothold at that point in time, and now you're in this leadership position with HDR, and you've been there for a while. So I have to ask, it's not common for a woman to be in that role.
Oh, you had to bring that up.
I had to bring it up. So I mean, if we think about this, and I think it's a really important conversation to have, because I think that the study is only 10% of like kind of the upper tier roles in big firms, like out of the top 100 for any roles, are women. And then in IT specifically, it's
what's the stat?
Like IT director, like that's kind of the research that was done, 5%. And I look at that, and it's staggering.
Yeah, I'm trying to think. I have some fantastic female colleagues or professionals that I've made a network with and done some amazing things. I think Birgitta Foster and Lauren Collier, and they're good examples. They're great examples, and trying to work with them more often. But I think the thing that frustrates me most is that, and this just sounds so cliche when you listen to stuff on this, but I don't like to think about it as how do we get more women into the positions, because I think women or men, good people that have good ideas that can work with a team, that want to work with a team, and not just out for I want my name on something. I want to be known, and I want to be the controller of things. That's it. It's not necessarily about men and women or the number of men versus number of women. It's just having an environment that allows people to succeed. And the environments that are open to different perspectives and different backgrounds and interests and strengths. Yeah. Honestly, is the way that works. So.
Well, also, I think it could also be related to, it's sort of a bit of a snowball effect or sort of self-perpetuating. Because I look at architecture. Architecture is very, I would say, it has a good spirit to it. Architects, I think, by nature have like a good worldview, and they tend to really advocate for a better world. By being an architect, you're advocating for a better world. But there's not very many role models for people that, to be quite frank, don't look like me. And then I think about technology and like the work that you're doing and that my wife's doing. I mean, you're putting a face on these ideas that
it's like, wait, hair and makeup now.
Yeah, no, you're putting. I mean, you're kind of saying like, no, there is a path for
women in technology,
women in technology,
absolutely.
women in architecture, and I think the same could be said for race and people from all sorts of different backgrounds. I think it's important to have those faces.
Absolutely, and so there's a lot of pressure. It's a lot of pressure.
Well, I mean, you don't think about it daily. It's one of those things you think about. It's like, but it's still important.
I feel like that. I solving problems. That's like my thing. I want to solve problems, make things better, and I'm not kumbaya necessarily, but I want things to work. And that's it. It's not about trying to meet a quota of any kind. But people should be welcome in this profession and should be able to move freely as their willingness to work hard takes them.
Great.
Yeah. That's depressing though.
I know it is. I mean, it's really, I do a fair amount of reading on this subject too. I mean, it's really important to talk about it, number one, and to really consider the implications of what that means, especially when it comes to growing and getting the best minds possible in the room for solving big problems that the industry faces. So, getting back to BIM and where the company has been and where it's going.
Yeah.
So there have been many stages along the way of the implementation of BIM and HDR. I've been fortunate enough from an outsider's perspective to be a part of some of these with via Case and now with Proving
You're just
Ground.
sitting on the outside with popcorn.
Yeah, we're
watching. Look what they're doing now. Look what they're gonna do. Yeah.
So I look at that. So I'm kind of curious to know, like, what's your perception been? Like, I mean, how long have you've been with the company now?
11 years.
11 years.
Yep.
It started in one place and now it's in another place. And
still based in Omaha.
Still based, yeah.
Moved a few blocks.
Right. So where is it going? Like, where did you see it start? You started in this sort of implementation set out, and your Revit's being adopted for the first time in the company, and there's these process changes. You now have, along the way, the emergence of computational design and other forms of innovation. There's a very clear message now on HDR's website about data-driven approaches. So talk about that a little bit. Talk about where it's at maybe today.
Where it's at now, I think that we've got 10 years of backlog of experience, good, bad, or otherwise, in the implementation. And I think the to summarize that in a nutshell, I think it's essentially we said, we're going to get a new tool, and we're going to just start using a new tool. And then we realized, it's not a new tool. It's like a whole process thing, and BIM's a process, yada yada. But for real, it's a process change. And then once we did the process, accepted that it was a process change, and started putting some guidelines around that and understanding how that works, you started to see a much better product come out of what the kind of BIM process was doing. More robust, whether people knew it or not. It's more robust. I think the programs have evolved quite a bit. The interoperability is, while not perfect or ideal, it's increased and improved. And now with the looking truly at the data behind all of the work that our teams have been doing, it's now saying, well, ka-ching, what can we do with that? And how can that actually benefit us in various stages of the project and our owners in the life cycle of the built environment. So computation, as I said earlier, innovation comes from requirements or challenges project teams face, and they go, oh, how do I make this happen? I think, I remember, I'll just say a big project. I'm not going to say the project, but a big project, Matt may have spoken about it, but he had been working with a couple other folks to try and resolve some issues and get some answers for the team, and like lots and lots of back-to-back, like overnight, like working sessions, and all of a sudden came out with, here's this thing, and you look at it, and I think now looking back at it, this algorithm or the computation that came out of that would probably look back and go, well, that's kind of gnarly, cool, but messy. But it met a need. And since that kind of really came out as like a thing, and you guys were involved with that to a degree, like I said, eating popcorn on the outside and sometimes stepping in and getting in the middle of the movie. But that started a whole kind of change in how we look at that digital asset and what we can do to develop it further or to leverage it later. And we're seeing a lot more happening on the front end of projects these days with computation to support data-informed, data-driven outcomes, or answering questions for people earlier so they feel more assured of what they're going to do. So that's great for our clients, great for our design teams. When they use it, they can ask meaningful questions of it. You can get wrapped around the axle and go, look, I got lots of data. But if you can get past that fun, fanciful part, you can get really good things.
That's the real hump, isn't it? I mean, I think there is certainly an intuitive notion that we're sitting on top of this gold mine of data, and data is always talked about in this sort of very abstract way, right? It's like we've got a lot of it. It's everywhere, and you're like, well, where precisely? And
can you point to it?
Can you? Yes, seriously, can you actually point to the source? And I would say that a big challenge then becomes, how do you take that excitement and turn it into something that is really a really tangible use, and a robust resource for people. So it's not abstract anymore, and actually is delivering some form of value.
Yeah. And once you see, I mean, it happened, well, now Tableau and Power BI and all these visualization tools, it's kind of like you see and you go, well, duh, that's what I wanted to do with that data. And you intuitively knew that you could, I want to know how, many widgets are in the what's it, and then calculate widgets per what's it, and whatever. You knew what you want to do, but now these tools are making it so easy to do that, and it's super fun. And so that's kind of the new thing for me. Along the way, standards development and thinking about business approach to technology is kind of like the front of house. The back of house is more me like tinkering with data and trying to really understand how these things work and the best way to present them and the best way to consume them and kind of manipulate the data so it tells us what we need to know. And so when we say, what are we doing, what's going forward for, HDR and the team, been very squarely focused on kind of that effort. And while we look at the applied R&D parts, that what they're telling, what they're telling me is there's a huge opportunity here. And how do we translate that into something that you can put your finger on and say, that's what it is. And that's what we are basing our stuff on. Short of pulling together, data collection efforts in silos for certain purposes to date, really, that's what I have not seen anybody in the industry doing anything but that. It's some magnificent tables come out of it and visualizations, but it's not based on any sort of automated or consistently fed kind of source.
A growing centralized database where you're able to like turn it into it's not like you're just doing schedule extracts from Revit and putting it into Excel and doing some cool things. It's like, how do you turn this into a scalable big data, true big data type of resource, and put it to use in these different contexts? I mean, there's uses for kind of doing evaluations of model quality. There's uses of benchmarking, which I know that is like a key component of what you're...
That's a fun one for me.
Yeah.
Working on that.
Benchmarking of portfolios, kind of showing trends across projects. What do you see as like the biggest challenge to getting that actually to work? Because I do see firms trying to, everyone's kind of poking the elephant from different angles on this subject, and I haven't quite seen anyone crack that nut yet. Man, how many metaphors did I just throw into that hole? And something,
one bite at a time.
How did we skin that cat, Rachel? Whoa.
let me tell you.
Maybe, that's...
Let me see if I can...
I don't know if that's staying in.
But I like that part. Did I say that interoperability had been improving? Is that what I said earlier? Did I say that?
Something, theoretically it's... I can't get any worse than it has been.
Okay, so I guess like I said, interoperability has improved. It's gotten better, but it's not ideal yet. And I think one of the biggest challenges is that just getting data from here to plug in with data over here, and to get the full picture of what you need to answer some of the best and biggest questions you have or your clients have. And so moving the data and centralizing it is just a hurdle. It's not impossible. It's just a significant hurdle. And then outside of that, so like the biggest thing is infrastructure, establishing the infrastructure, the pathways for those data to come together, and then to extract data and to like visualize. So that's where it's, in a nutshell, what we're looking at trying to achieve. But once you have that highway system there, then you got to start putting the cars on it and see them go through. And some people don't have wheels on their car. Some people, have pink on their left side and not on the right. And then the other car has pink on the right, not on the left. And inconsistencies are crazy. So you start dumping, models and things that should be consistent into this highway system, and you just get a mangled mess at the end. So the challenge there is trying to figure out how to properly clean that up.
Yeah,
well, to make it right.
There's two sides of it, right? There's the how do you clean it up?
Well, if everybody were perfect, we wouldn't have to worry about
it. You bring up a very so there's like kind of this post processing of the models to make them useful in any kind of meaningful way, which is not inexpensive. I mean, there's like you have to. If it could be automated, you have to invent the automation, which is or you put a bunch of people in cleaning roles, which no one wants to do, and work through the data. These are not inexpensive activities.
And that's also that's totally error prone too.
Right.
Right.
Well, and then the other side of it is the standard side. And like you said, if everyone had been
Perfect.
had we taken the standard, like, and it's everywhere. I mean, there's a strong standards aversion, I think, in architecture practice, especially in design practice.
Don't tell me what to do.
Don't tell me what to do. This came up with Matt. This sort of idea is like, don't tell me what to do. That'll make sure people don't get on your side. There's that type of mentality. People don't want to feel like their ideas are being constrained in any way, even though my view of standards is very different. It's like,
it's to free you up.
It's to like take all of this stuff off the table that I don't want to have to think about every time, right? And if this is the way we do it, I'm just going to do that, and then I'm going to spend all of my other energy looking at designing kind of the remaining 20% of the really hard problems. I want to get the easy problems out of the way because I'm tired of them.
Let something else manage that, right?
Yeah.
I don't need to design a elevation bubble.
But it's I would say that BIM and architecture and standards in the United States is not that good. Like this is if I look, if I
sell us out.
no, I'm not selling any firm or anyone in particular out, but
the country.
The country. No, it's true. But so if you look at adoption of BIM, I think America has done an amazing job at getting broad adoption. Like your firm, of some size, small, big, people have, bought Revit. I think it's kind of, it can be said that is the sort of the dominant tool that people are using to deliver buildings today, big firm or small firm or, anywhere in between. But what we haven't been good at is consistency. The adoption curve for each of these firms, different firms, firm to firm, is vastly different. People have different internal standards, and people have built up their own templates and, have built up their own content libraries, and they've tailored their process around this stuff, but it's very internally facing. And there are industry standards. They're out there, and I know you've been a part of a number of them.
Working on them.
Right? But it's a missed opportunity because now people are finally talking about the information side of BIM, and they're like, "Wow, we've done all these models. Now we want to pull out information from them." But
but what did you put in them?
What did you put in them, and how did you put it in? So that's a big challenge.
So interesting note though. Now, what was it? 2013, I think. I went to it's now called Building Innovation, but the NIBS conference on kind of technologies and innovation in building. They actually had it paired with Transportation Research Board, TRB, had a conference, and they kind of overlapped by a day. And it was a workshop on BIM. And for the transportation, realm to kind of understand what the vertical construction, design world had been grappling with for a few years now, and a decade. And so they were just starting. And I went and I watched, and I was like, wow, I didn't realize they didn't use this stuff already, right? And that was 2013. And that was interesting. So I went back to my side of the fence and kept doing the work that we were doing. And now, in 2019, you're seeing all sorts of government kind of driven initiatives coming out and saying, let's get together and figure this out. Let's see what we can do around standardizing BIM for transportation and infrastructure. So very different project set, but BIM all the same. Information modeling for the sake of design, communication and construction and operations and what have you. And they're making a pretty solid go of it. They're investing in it in a way that I've never seen any entity invest in it in the vertical construction side. So I'm a little bit envious. But I'm like, hey, we've learned a lot over here. We could use extra cash though, to fund some of those standardized approaches for the U.S. And I think more than the U.S., I think industry wide, globally, it's important for us to understand what makes sense. So trying to get past language barriers and trying to make sure data is data is data. And there's ways to do that through OmniClass, or you've got Uniclass, I think, as well as another way to go about it. But IFC is kind of I'm buying into IFC. I think IFC is a good approach to develop that and make that something that we can start to translate.
Yeah, that one's an interesting one. I mean, if I think about IFC in the context of benchmarking, I mean, to me, that's really where there is like immediate near-term benefit for IFC in the process. It may not be an authoring format. It may not be a format that, that might have limitations in other capacities. But as an open standard, if I put myself in the position of an owner or a firm that's trying to maintain their portfolio, like, would you ever go back and open up a Revit 2008 project
Could
today?
I go back
Could you?
and open up a Revit 2008 format? I would have to do a lot of praying and hoping that it would work when I open it up. That's what I'd have to do. But so that is another reason for me, outside of the benchmarking or the interoperability, just the sustainability of a digital asset for a long term, from here to whenever I need it next, whether I'm the design team or the client looking to maintain my portfolio. I need something that can be opened, agnostic of platform, because who knows, any of the major, platforms could fail tomorrow. You never know what happens. They could sell out and everybody go live on an island or something. But that'd have to be a pretty big island for Autodesk if they did that. But you have to think about what that contingency plan, what's that plan B for your assets that you have, and the company the size of HDR, we do a massive number of projects and have a lot of digital assets that, even the smallest firms can benefit from it, because you've got it. It's kind of like recycling. You recycle something that once just sat as a paperweight, and now we're going to do something with it. Tremendous value there if you can crack that open. And I think an IFC gives us an idea of how that might happen.
Right. Yeah, and it becomes a file type, a representation of the model that isn't dependent on all this other baggage that comes with maintaining subscriptions to software. It's you can open it up in any number of viewers. You can navigate the data.
Open it back up in the native software. I mean,
exactly.
I don't mean this to like say I don't want the tool that we think is the best in class for doing that work. It just means that I don't want to be encumbered by a version of it or something. So
because if we operate by the notion that this data is valuable, then you want to be able to unlock that data at any point in time and have some level of assurance that you're going to be able to get to it. And as software evolves and some of the those formats evolve, then you're kind of putting your potential gold mine at risk, unless you're really looking at some of these open model representation formats like IFC. That I totally kind of can get behind.
Well, even if you were to say a native modeling platform, Bentley or Revit or Autodesk, were to say, you know what, we don't care about version. We'll give you a file and it'll work whatever version you open it up. And it'll be perfect and wonderful at whatever point in the future. We promise, we guarantee. And if that were in fact the case, it still wouldn't necessarily be the answer, because our projects, our deliverables are from multiple platforms. So if they can't play together, if they can't work well together, then you still have that issue. So while you make it, we see things like BIM 360 opening up a lot of different tool sets to be able to work on your data and to deliver things with tremendous workflows built in. But it's still a closed system. It's still, you've got to have a special key to connect in, or you've got to, have permissions, or you have to transfer something into. It's not seamless. As nice as it is within that little comfy, 4 walls, but we don't always work within 4 walls. We don't get put in a box. We're designers. We go all over the place.
So maybe to wrap it up,
I guess.
What would you say, like, given your experience both getting into architecture, finding your way into technology, helping a firm the size of HDR transition towards BIM, and now you're looking at a paradigm where you're leveraging data associated with BIM and other design technology. If there was like one thing that a firm maybe of similar size, or maybe a firm that might be smaller, if there's one thing that you would say, like, get on this one thing and make it happen, what would that be?
I would say the biggest thing to be most successful, I think it's allowing your people to feel comfortable in the tools that they use day to day, allowing them, expecting them, providing them with what they need to become proficient in the tools that they use.
It's like equipping them with basically investing in their knowledge is what you're saying. Like,
Yep.
you've and that's a tricky thing. It shouldn't be tricky, but it is. If you look at firms that go through very rigorous day-to-day, tyranny of the urgent, we've got to put out a fire drill, we have to get this project out the door, and then it's on the next one, and we're maintaining utilization and those types of targets on staff. The investment in the knowledge of that staff, where you're actually taking them out of the day-to-day and saying, you know what, you're going to sit and learn this thing. That's what you're talking about.
I don't necessarily mean you've got to sit them in a room and
right.
make them.
I was being metaphorical.
But no, but that's what I think. That's what they think.
Yeah.
They think you're taking them completely out of the picture. So that's the part that you have to be very clear about when you're talking about the T word, training. Yeah, training. Nobody wants to sit and be trained, but they all want training. Mm-hmm. Nobody wants to pay for training, but they all want good workers. They want people that are skilled, that produce quality work.
Right.
So how can you expect to, and the sharpen the axe, that's another thing, sharpening the axe. How can you expect an axe to plow through, all these trees without taking a second and sharpening it once in a while, or on a regular basis even? I think it's a very sticky wicket, is talking about that. It's a financial investment. It's time, and it's out of the, but I'm sorry, we really have to make this plane fly. We really, really do. And we got to fly higher and faster, and we have to fly. Let's take the engine out. That's my idea. Let's take the engine out. And that's what I feel like sometimes the logic is illogical. It's like, well, let's just keep running it as fast as we can go and as far as we can go, and we'll be fine. Yeah. You may land it. It's going to be a crash landing, though. And then you're going to ask that team to get up and fly again. So at some point, you need to refuel. At some point, you need to figure out how to restock what's on board, and you'll be fine. You just got to focus on some of that. So when I said the most expensive thing about technology, it's communications, and I include communications as far as awareness or as workflows, or those are all communications to me. Internal, not external necessarily. I mean, external is a cost, but that's nominal. It's internal communications.
And huge. It shows up on. I think when people, from the feedback we've received in the past, when we used to do more training than we do now, we don't do as much training these days. But people would have us in for a workshop, and we would teach any manner of computational design concepts to a group of 15. Then it would come back, maybe 6 months later. And we would receive feedback on, when people had their annual reviews, and when they would cite a reason why they were staying with the firm, or were very much excited about working in the firm, they would actually cite that training. They would cite that was a lot of fun going into and doing this workshop and learning something new. It shows that you were invested in my future, and it starts to speak to the culture of a company that's willing to do that, and also speaks to just kind of an HR notion of talent retention. It's very obvious if people feel like they're being invested in.
We could talk a lot about career path definition as well for technology, but
exactly,
feeling invested in, as far as training, feeling like there's a way forward for you, not necessarily that people want a linear path. Some do, some don't. I think less now than before, because it's more acceptable. But even a sort of map of places that you could go, not necessarily a A to B to C to D, but if I'm interested in this, where are the locations I should visit? Maybe you should look at support at this level. Maybe you should look at leadership at this level. Different opportunities that take technology into different areas of practice. I think is important to consider as well. Retention.
And so if there's a theme throughout this entire conversation, I would say that it's invest in your people.
Invest in your people.
Invest in your people and invest in your culture.
Absolutely.
Invest in your culture.